Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Thursday, September the 2nd, 21. First topic, why do progressives love abortion? This is a story from Week by Ryan Cooper called The Supreme Court Just Effectively Overturned Roe v. Wade with Legal Calvin Ball. I'm sorry, I don't know what legal Calvin ball means. Just a refresher, the Supreme Court of the United States decision, Roe v. Wade, drew upon the 1996 decision in Griswold versus Connecticut, which invented a spurious right to privacy in the U.S. Constitution. And notoriously, one of the judges talked about a penumbra. Yes, there was a penumbra, which meant that abortion must be legal. That at that time, in 1973, there were a great many states, including New York and California, under Ronald Reagan, no less, that had legalized abortion. But the Supreme Court held that there must be a national law on this. One of the many Supreme Court decisions that effectively, removed federalism from the United States of America. In any event, this story begins. The Supreme Court effectively overturned Roe v. Wade with a 5-4 unsigned decision issued in the middle of the night, Wednesday. Ooh, how spooky, middle of the night. The Texas government created a legal end-round precedent to ban the vast majority of abortions in the state and set up a massive incentive to suppress even the ones that are still technically legal. The court declined to stop it. It's legal Calvin ball. Again, I don't know what that means. Is a reference to a cartoon. 5 ultra-reactionary justices, one of whom occupies a stolen seat. How was it stolen? And 3 of whom were appointed by a president who lost the popular vote. Again, so what? Ignoring all precedent and basic constitutional mechanics to stuff through an incredibly unpopular right-wing attack on reproductive freedom. And the legal mechanism they countenance is even worse than the effect on abortion rights. Here's how the Texas law works. As Mark Joseph Stern explains at Slate, it was designed as a nakedly tenditious way to get around the entire American legal framework. It bans any abortion that happens once a fetal heartbeat can be detected, which typically happens at about 6 weeks, but forbids any state officials from enforcing the law. Instead, the law allows any random person to sue an abortion provider for $10,000 in civil court for providing an illegal abortion or for aiding and abetting an illegal abortion, even if the person did not know that their aid would be used for an illegal abortion, like a donations, for instance, or for even intending to do so. If you post on Facebook that you're going to donate to post-heartbeat abortion funds in Texas, congratulations. Texas just put a $10,000 bounty on your head. If you say so, Yahoo. There is no exception for rape or incest, though the law does say a rapist can't be the one to sue. That structure takes advantage of the fact that federal courts aren't allowed to enjoin state ones to make it impossible to sue anyone to contest the law. It's like the Republicans were reading Kafka's The Trial as an instruction manual. Just the strict legal function of this law will make most abortions illegal. The length of pregnancy is typically calculated from the date of a woman's last period, meaning a woman 6 weeks pregnant has only really been pregnant for 4 weeks. Oh, if you say so. Basically, you have 2 weeks from a missed period to get in under the technical legal wire. Most people do not even realize they're pregnant at this point or have trouble scraping enough money or getting an appointment that fast, which is why about 2/3 of abortion happen after 6 weeks. Oh, trouble scraping enough money? Well, maybe they could keep a jar with pennies, nickels, quarters in the jar to save up for one. In practice, this law will almost certainly destroy all abortion providers in Texas inside of a few months. It stipulates that if a bounty hunter wins in court, then the defendant has to pay both parties' legal bills, and an abortion provider, or abortionist, as one might say, found guilty is shut down. But if the defendant prevails, the bounty hunter does not have to return the favor. It's a practically open invitation for any conservative with a bit of money to file endless lawsuits against all abortion providers, including every member of their staff, and knock them all out of business with legal fees and harassment. Hey presto, abortion is effectively illegal in Texas. I'd always figured that sooner or later Roe v. Wade was getting overturned by this court, but I did not think they would do it through granting vigilantes and bounty hunters a wide open route to file nuisance lawsuits by the millions. Basically, Texas is saying we're allowed to violate the Constitution so long as we deputize private citizens to do it, and the court is agreeing. I have read the American Constitution, as I'm sure many of you have. I don't see any right to abortion in the Bill of Rights. In any event, this argument continues. The precedent set here is incredibly alarming. Apart from the dozens of states that are already planning to ban abortion in the same fashion, the justices are telling conservatives that they can pass basically any unconstitutional law they want, and the Supreme Court will pretend to be unable to block them, as Adam Serwer writes at The Atlantic. And as the New York Times' Jamel Bowie, oh yes, that great thinker, points out, this kind of private law is a disturbing echo of cases in the 1870s and 1880s in which the Supreme Court struck down laws protecting African American civil rights by pretending that Congress had no power to ban racist acts by individuals up to and including mass murder. Yes, the old New York Times meme comes to mind. Abortion banned in Texas, blacks' hardest hit. The way this decision was released is evidence of malign intent. Nobody put their name to the opinion because they know that it is complete bad faith BS. The fact that they quietly released it at midnight shows that they know that a total abortion ban is hideously unpopular, polling at just 19% support, according to Gallup. Okay, well, this isn't a total abortion ban. In Calvin Ball, famously, the rules are made up as you go along, and you can never play it the same way twice. Yes. And of course, liberals, progressives, those people who believe that the Constitution is a living document, have never played Calvin ball with the Constitution. Legally, this decision has all the legitimacy of a bucket of warm spit. Democrats would be equally justified in passing a law legalizing abortion, declaring Marbury versus Madison wrongly decided, and instructing the federal bureaucracy to ignore any Supreme Court orders to the contrary. Or, you know, as Andrew Jackson once famously said, Justice Madison has made his decision, now let him enforce it. Yeah, again, why do progressives, people who call themselves progressives, love abortion so much? Oh, it's a feminist thing. Well, you know, the first generation of feminists, such as Susan B. Anthony, were very strongly anti-abortion, taking the line that you men want to have fun with us women, but you won't let us keep our babies. Progressives, left-wingers, are always claiming to be on the side of the little guy, but there is no one littler or more powerless and sinless, for that matter, than a baby in utero. It's just an expression of naked power, actually. Now, this is from Charlie Spearing at Breitbart. President Biden announced a, quote, whole of government effort, unquote, on Thursday to fight the latest Texas ban on aborting a child who has a heartbeat. I am directing that counsel and the Office of the White House Counsel to launch a whole of government effort to respond to this decision, Biden wrote in a statement. In a statement, Biden proposed using the Department of Health and Human Services and the Justice Department to challenge the Texas law and ensure women's access to abortions. The president criticized the Supreme Court for choosing not to rule immediately to block the Texas law, calling it an unprecedented assault on a woman's constitutional rights. Again, you can look as hard as you like, but you're not going to find this in the Bill of Rights. Rather than use its supreme authority to ensure justice could be fairly sought, the highest court of our land will allow millions of women in Texas in need of critical reproductive care to suffer while courts sift through procedural complexities, Biden said. The Supreme Court voted 5-4 to deny an emergency request for an injunction on enforcing the ban. as challenges to the new law make their way through the lower court system. Biden said the Supreme Court's decision insults the rule of law because the Texas law unleashes unconstitutional chaos. Golly, that's never happened in the United States before. Again, it's a question of whom. When the liberals get their way, the Constitution can be twisted like a pretzel. When anti-liberals get their way, well, it's constitutional chaos. Both President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris excoriated the Texas abortion law Wednesday, warning it would reduce abortion access for women of color. Oh, really? That's the route they're going to take? Harris wrote in a statement, this law will dramatically reduce access to reproductive care for women in Texas, particularly for women with low incomes and women of color. Again, from Breitbart, this is Wendell Huspo. Leftists reacted to the pro-life 5-4 victory the Supreme Court handed down that bans most abortions in Texas after 6 weeks of pregnancy, while legal challenges to that law proceed in lower courts. Representative Eric Swalwell, Democrat of California, tweeted that he believes a tyrannical regime is using its power to control women, concluding Texas Taliban. Who's the first person to bring up the handmaids? Of course, there's forced breeding in The Handmaid's Tale, and no one is suggesting that the vast majority of women in Texas seeking abortions, that they were forced into sexual intercourse. Author Stephen King asserted that the Taliban would love the Texas abortion law. Never-Trumper Cherry Jacobus suggested that women and girls should be airlifted out of Taliban-controlled Texas. We need an airlift out of Taliban Texas, women and girls first, she said. Self-designated thriller writer Megyn Kelly Hall wrote that Texas should be boycotted before using the hashtag Texas Taliban. Every recording artist or entertainer, every athlete, every comedian should cancel their tour dates in Texas, she said. Today, right now, don't wait another second. Don't bring money and business to a state that has put $10,000 bounties on women's heads. Popular far-left talk show host Cenk Uygur tweeted that God is not pro-choice, he is pro-abortion, that if you think your wife cheated on you, the priest administers a toxic potion to cause a miscarriage to expel the fetus from the body, quoting Numbers 5:11-31. I guess Uygur is one of these people who don't understand the enormous difference between the Old and New Testaments. Oh, you Christians aren't allowed to do this because in the Old Testament it says, well, yeah, you see, there's a new dispensation that Christians believe in. It's amazing to me that there are so many people like Cenk Uygur who who rail against Christianity while displaying a almost fundamental ignorance of it. New York Times bestselling author who dubbed himself king of the internet, George Takei, took to Twitter to blast the Supreme Court as a real death panel that has allowed vigilante enforcement of an unconstitutional Texas abortion law. Well, the Supreme Court ruled on this, at least temporarily, so I guess it must be constitutional. That's how these things work. Self-described author of fiction, Jack Wallen, decried those in Texas who are pro-life as Texas Taliban. He raged on Twitter, "What next, Texas Taliban? Are you going to ban divorce, refuse women the right to work, make it law that every woman must get pregnant within a year of marriage, remove a woman's right to say no, give spousal abuse a big Texas thumbs up, bring back stoning?" Yes, apparently preventing women after 6 weeks to kill their unborn children is equivalent to stoning them. Entertainment and alphabet people news contributors Scott Nevins suggested the Republican Party is the Texas Taliban. Why are these homosexuals so wrought up about abortion? It's not a question that they will ever need to face because homosexuals can't make babies. Not with other homosexuals, they can't. A PhD candidate conducting accent research with vulnerable people, whatever that means, and who inhabits the intersections of science and society, R.K. Radhakrishnan, suggested that the Taliban has landed in Texas. Women get out now to a safer country. Well, you see, back when states could determine their own abortion laws, well, if you want to live in a place where women can abort their babies, then I suppose you would live in a place where that is the law. If you don't want to live in a state where women, cannot abort their babies, well, you can state shop. That's the nature of federalism, actually. Dr. Lisa Welsh, and what kind of doctor is she? Oh, she's a mom, and she's a PhD in reproductive physiology. University professor, activist, business owner, and former Democratic nominee for U.S. House District 12 in Texas. She said, "I will not leave Texas. My husband, children, and grandchildren were born and raised in Texas. I was born in Texas and lived here for over 30 years. I will stay and fight the frightening new attack Texas has launched against women." Brave, brave, brave woman. Indeed, she is. All of the things being equal, each act of procreation, or sexual intercourse, has about a 25% chance of resulting in procreation, in the begetting of a child. It is my understanding that boys and girls are taught this at a very early age in sex ed classes. But with, terms like unwanted or, unexpected pregnancy. Oh, I remember a Muriel Spark novel in which a ex-girlfriend informs her ex-boyfriend that she is pregnant, and he says, "How did this happen?" And she replies, "In the usual manner I expect." But laws against, abortion access, contraception, generally, it devalues sexual intercourse. Sexual intercourse has no consequences anymore. Contraception has essentially made sexual intercourse mutual masturbation. Let's go to the chat. Oh, I should mention that, what's his name? Richard Hollandia, is that his name? Was complaining that, oh dear, this is going to mean more Down's syndrome babies. Oh, and that would be the worst thing in the world. Oh, we all love the handicapped, don't we? Except that if it's discovered or even suspected that a child in utero is handicapped, well, it must be culled. That's how sensitive a people we are. Halper says federalism has died 1 million deaths in the U.S. Hello to Anrun. Hello to Palpcasso 88. Dan Allison says the faux hysteria of the pro-aborts always amuses me. Hello to Dan. Hello to William Hicks. Dan Allison says the effect will be legal maneuvers to establish that laws like this can never be passed again. Anrun says that he loves Calvin and Hobbes. Dan Allison says Marbury was wrongly decided. Well, that's certainly my opinion. No Sleep Till Breezewood, Pennsylvania says Progs love abortion because everything they believe was made up in a PR firm. Simple as. Hello to William Hicks, Contiki Roulette. Dan Allison says, doesn't she mean anti-reproductive? Hello to Head McNeck. Yeah, I'm sorry what happened. About, I don't know, 1 in 5, 1 in 10 times that I click on go live, it just hangs. I don't know why I do this. The procedure is the same every time, but then I have to start again. Hello to Dave Boreas. William Hicks says, wasn't the 1973 definition of when life begins the third trimester? Could they have been any more arbitrary? Well, yes. The Supreme Court, oh, yes. Trimesters. Oh, what's a trimester? Well, 3 months plus 3 months plus 3 months. Oh, funny, no one had ever talked that way before. Chogokin 666 says, is contraception that difficult? No. Well, they give out condoms everywhere. Now, it's there was this woman who got Rush Limbaugh into trouble a few years ago. He made fun of her. She was a student at a Catholic university, and she was complaining that the university didn't supply contraception as part of their health plan. Well, various people looked it up, and I may get the figures slightly wrong, but if you go to Walmart or some such place, you can get birth control for something like $25 a month, oral birth control. And if your freedom to have sex and not get pregnant is that important to you, it seems to me that $25 or so a month is not a very big price to pay for that. Let's see. Steve says celebrities promise to stay away. No, stop. Not that. My body, my choice, unless it's a vaccine. No, says Dan, this is a very good point. This argument that people have control, autonomy over their bodies. Well, no, this is simply not true, because there's all sorts of things you're not allowed to do to one's body. For instance, I don't know, the U.S. Customs Service deciding that they're going to ban imports of a certain treatment that begins with I. Yes, my body, my choice. What about vaccines? What about mRNA therapy? Oh, no, that's different. How? How exactly is that different? Hello to Texas Feral Hog. Seven Costanza says, I really can't agree with KMG here. Making abortion illegal in America as it is would be a disaster. I don't see how, actually. I hope you're not suggesting that this would mean fewer black people because of the rather high rate of abortion amongst blacks in the United States. Oscar Tosa, stupid me, I thought the right was getting demolished, but somehow abortion has been banned. How does this make sense? There would be a lot more criminals and people on welfare, etc., says Anne Run. Yes, this is the Henry Morgenthaler argument that, I am personally responsible for lower rates of crime in Canada because I killed so many babies in utero. Henry Morgenthaler was a refugee who came to Canada and became the king of abortion. It was his case that the Supreme Court adjudicated that eliminated all restrictions on abortion in Canada. And Canada is among, one or two countries in the entire world that has no restrictions on abortion. If you go to Europe, in most places in Europe, it is very difficult to get an abortion after 20 weeks or 24 weeks. In Canada, even partial birth abortion is allowed. The distinctions between abortion, and I'll say rape, I heard Henry Morgenthaler say in public on a radio program at a station where I worked that this bringing up rape, it's not relevant. He said because there are very few cases of conception that derive from rape. And if there is a rape exception to anti-abortion laws, then an enormous number of women will simply lie and say they were raped. The definition of rape has expanded so dramatically over the last few decades, such that we used to know what rape meant, but increasingly now it means, yes, I had sex with a man, and afterwards, I don't know, the next day, the next week, the next month, I decided that this had been a bad idea. So it counts as rape. Seven Costanza says every American city would have Chicago's crime rates within 2 decades. Mattress Girl, says Don Willis. Yes. Sandra Fluke was her name, Kevin. Yes, I remember. I remember her. Imagine going to a Catholic university and demanding that it pay for your birth control. So abortion is a pre-crime tactic. Morgenthaler was awarded the Order of Canada, says Metal Mike. Morgenthaler seemed to advance a position that, if he'd been around in Hitler's time or in 1889, well, then the world wouldn't have suffered Hitler because he could have aborted him. Yes, this is pre-crime. We're just going to determine which individuals are likely to become nasty or murderous adults and kill them before that happens. Metal Mike says, actually, they never use the word rape at all. Everything is now sexual assault, groping and rape included. Yes, this is a good point. Because, again, sexual assault can mean almost anything. William Hicks says, I remember that day in 7th grade, 1979, social studies teacher told us babies weren't considered persons by Scotus. Every kid in class freaked. We'd all been brought up to believe otherwise. Abortion is the leftist version of communion in their religion. I remember Naomi Wolf some years ago got into a lot of trouble because she said that she believed in abortion, but that she also said that we need to acknowledge that it is a death. And there was just screaming at her, how dare you? How dare you? Now, I understand the point of view that abortion can be a regrettable necessity. But no, that's not good enough for these people. They have to praise it to the skies. And again, what's a valid excuse for abortion? Any excuse is valid. Now, abortion, for instance, in Canada and in Britain, to give two examples, legalized abortion was sold on the hard cases theory. That, oh, yes, here's a 45-year-old woman who already has 8 children, and she was raped by her ex-husband, et cetera, et cetera. Well, as they say, hard cases make bad law. And I remember some years ago being somewhat shocked that a columnist in the Vancouver province was talking about a case where a woman had admitted that she'd had an abortion because she didn't want to look fat during swimsuit season. And the columnist at the Vancouver province said, well, what's wrong with that? What indeed? Of course, abortion, homosexuality, and a no-fault divorce were all sold in Canada for roughly the same reason, hard cases. Oh, no, this is not going to become routine. Well, of course it did become routine. Here's a piece from the American Mind by Helen Roy called Lib Fem Lobotomy, Connecting the Dots the Experts Won't. The Flynn effect and its reversal are topics of scientific inquiry by which, should you find yourself inching towards politically incorrect conclusions, cancellation looms ominously. In 2016, in a systematic literature review of all major accounts of the post-70s IQ plummet across Western countries, Edward Dutton of the Ulster Institute for Social Research concluded that the best explanation for the dawdling of the Western mind had both environmental and genetic components. The Industrial Revolution's technological advances, he argued, precipitated massive gains on IQ scores by establishing an environment which compelled us to think in a more scientific way, compelled us to become more educated, and saturated us with knowledge, information, and novel problems. But industry simultaneously brought dysgenic fertility practices. It precipitated a decline in fertility, especially for wealthy people, and those with weaker genetic material were able to survive and themselves procreate, whereas they would have died in previous centuries. Dutton determined that the Flynn effect is best explained as temporary superficial adaptation to new forms of education, which disguised post-industrial genetic degradation for a period of time, until the truth of dysgenic fertility could overcome the effects of the new educational environment, a reversal which he identified as the negative Flynn effect. These conclusions, as well as his other forays into forbidden areas of scientific knowledge, created several problems for Dutton, namely his disaffiliation from the Ulster Institute. 2 years later, in a study entitled Flynn Effect and its Reversal Are Both Environmentally Caused, Swedish researchers Drs. Bratsberg and Rogerberg analyzed the IQ scores of Norwegian men born between 1962 and 1991. They found the scores increased by almost 3 percentage points each decade for those born between 1962 to 1975, but saw a steady decline among those born after 1975. The reverse Flynn effect was confirmed, but Bratsberg and Rogerberg insisted, against the conclusions of Dutton, in line with the demands of political correctness, that these changes had nothing to do with genetics. In an effort to rule out dysgenic fertility theory, they pointed out that the same trend occurred within families over time. The study looked at the IQ scores of brothers who were born in different years and found that instead of being similar, as suggested by a genetic explanation, IQ scores often differed significantly between the siblings. The researchers thus concluded that environmental factors exclusively have caused change in intelligence. In other words, that they cannot possibly be caused by any idiocracy or camp of the saints style outnumbering of the intelligent by the relatively unintelligent. What specific environmental factors are to blame? Bratsburg and Rogerberg leave those unexplored. Let us leave behind genetics for the moment and take seriously the point that Dutton and the rest agree upon, that environmental factors are a significant driver of an intelligence avalanche in the Western world. The first question we should ask, what kind of environmental factors might we consider? Dutton and Bratsburg alike cite education, class, and healthcare because scientific consensus suggests that these have a significant impact on the development of IQ in its most sensitive stage, early childhood. If early childhood is the foundation of IQ development and a family environment is the foundation of early childhood, it follows that family life, which constitutes and defines a child's education, class, health, as well as religion and culture, would have an immeasurable impact on IQ. Were there any dramatic changes to the style and structure of family life in the Western world dating to around 1975, coinciding with the Flynn effect's reversal? Well, of course. The 70s saw the two greatest pivotal changes in the composition and dynamic of American family life in modern history. First, the proportion of women working outside the home passed from minority to majority in 1974. Workforce expansion, branded as the empowerment of women, meant the children of the decade would come to be known as latchkey kids. For the slightly more conscientious parent, the 1970s saw the birth of the daycare industry, which has ballooned since its introduction. In 2021, just 15% of infants and toddlers are cared for in a family home. In 1970, divorced California Governor Ronald Reagan brought no-fault divorce into law. All 50 states and Washington, D.C. followed the progressive vanguard soon after. Divorce rates skyrocketed beginning in the late 60s, unsurprisingly for anyone familiar with suicide rates. Out-of-wedlock births also skyrocketed with the divorce rate, likely due to a drop in popularity of the shotgun wedding. By 2019, the percentage of children living in single-parent homes reached 34%. A new kind of progressive living and learning environment was thus thrust upon children of all income brackets forevermore, one in which a growing majority of children were constantly subjected to unstable relationships with adults. Each development, from female labor participation to industrial childcare to no-fault divorce, was ushered in and celebrated as victory of the feminist movement. It wasn't just the structural changes that made a difference. Latchkey kids and millennial daycare babes alike, whether children of careerist mothers or absent fathers, were raised on a steady diet of mass media and fast food. These habits of consumption, adapted to a new deconstructed family environment, eventually led to crises in obesity and screen addiction that have demonstrated impacts on intellectual ability in the long term. Even KFC marketed their chicken in the 1970s by using the term women's liberation. As for the psychological impact of these changes, in a study entitled Cognitive and Non-Cognitive Costs of Daycare at age 0 to 2 for Children in Advantaged Families, published in 2020, Margarita Fort et al. Showed that one additional daycare month at age 0 to 2 reduces intelligence quotient by 0.5%, which is 4.7% of a standard deviation, at age 8 to 14 in a relatively affluent population. The magnitude of this negative effect increases with family income. Similar negative impacts are found for personality traits. Considering divorce, Spiegelman et al. Demonstrated in 1991 that children of divorced parents showed significantly higher levels of hostility, aggression, and anxiety than children of married parents. Allow me to engage in a bit of epistemic trespassing. Despite assuming a stance of radical chic, of late-night laugh-track condescension, of intellectual and moral dominion over provincial trads, feminists have made the world much, much stupider. By instituting and normalizing such destructive practices as no-fault divorce, careerism, fatherlessness, and fast food, the feminist movement and its lackeys are guilty of depriving tens of millions of children the stability in early life that would have made them more confident, competent members of a more confident, competent society at large. Family environmental changes, which manifested during the 1970s, have measurable negative effects on long-term emotional well-being and IQ. That should have at least some impact on scientific consensus. However, for clearly political reasons, Researchers cannot draw any sort of connection between these deep structural changes in Western society and our concomitant dumbing down. While scientists may perform discrete inquiries into the effects of one element or another, to highlight the connections which constitute the general picture remains dangerous. The liberal scientist must detract from the arguments of the geneticist by drawing the world's attention to environmental factors. But if we scratch the surface of environmental factors, we find ourselves once again in an uncomfortable position. The truth remains uncomfortable. Liberal myth-making and scientific inquiry have proven fundamentally incompatible. And again, this is a piece which appeared on August 31st by Helen Roy at AmericanMind.org. You know, policymakers for decades have seemed reluctant to consider, the consequences of their decisions. You will recall, when was it? 30 years ago or so, we started hearing about single mothers. Single mothers had previously been praised. Now they were a bad thing. Why were they a bad thing? Well, because, welfare payments and such like, they were a drag on the economy. When these same policymakers decided to usher in no-fault divorce, and when they essentially made common law marriage the same as legal marriage, what did they think was going to happen? But no, it became popular for politicians, to rage against single mothers, that they were these selfish women who insisted on staying at home when, they could be wage slaves. They could be sitting in a cubicle every day, which grows the GDP. And now in my own country, Canada, oh, well, we're going to have $10 a day daycare, which essentially is a bribe to force all stay-at-home mothers into the workforce, because apparently it doesn't matter who raises children. I mean, anyone can do it, apparently. But we know that is not true. Let's go back to the chat. Is Aimee Therese a real person, says Ashy Main Bravo. It is my understanding that she is a real person who lives in Australia. I was talking about her yesterday. I find her fascinating because she said that she's on the left, but her opinions on social issues are not of the modern left, certainly. Well, I guess they're not on the modern right, because the modern right has been telling us, the conservatives have been telling us for decades, that the highest virtue in life is choice. Now, as Edmund Burke pointed out famously, back in the 18th century, more choices means more bad choices. Single mothers, you mean stay-at-home mothers, right? Says Visionary Companion. Society is fundamentally a death cult, says Brandon Smith, so why not abortion? Steve says, Aimee Therese has the best Pepe memes. Don Willis says, I've noticed that everyone who is for abortion has already been born. The curious thing about Ronald Reagan, because he seemed to feel guilty in later years about his support for legalized abortion when he was governor of California. In the 1980s, Ronald Reagan published a book. Well, that is to say, there was a book published under his name about abortion, which was anti-abortion. And the media decided that a sitting president publishing a book on abortion was not newsworthy. Golly, I wonder. I wonder why they would come to that conclusion. Don Willis says, I have numerous burner accounts, sock, whatever, how crazy our online world has become. Okay. Visionary Companion says, either they come to realize it was a monstrous act or they become monsters. I have, spoken to many women who've had abortions. Supposedly something like 1 in 5 women used to have abortions. I guess this was before the morning after pill. Most of these women were quite shy about it. And if they spoke about it at all, it was with regret. Now, occasionally you run into these women who have to tell the whole world that they had an abortion. And I thought, why would you tell people that? Why would you tell a potential sexual partner this? Because, just a heads up, if we have sex and I get pregnant, I'm going to kill your child. That has to be very off-putting to most men, actually. Visionary Companion says abortion ruined a relative of mine, and I'm convinced it has ruined millions of women. Visionary Companion again, Graham Parker got tons of flack for You Can't Be Too Strong because it suggested that abortion was heartbreaking. Well, I've noticed that in recent years, Graham Parker has rather walked back from that interpretation of the song. But, it's obvious. Chad Chadson, our valiant moderator, thank you for your service, says feminists will never tell you how old their children would be if they hadn't aborted them. And Metal Mike says Naomi Wolf has been canceled by the left and is now considered a conspiracy theorist. Right from the beginning of Naomi Wolf's career, you see this envy amongst so many other progressive women. When she wrote that book, The Beauty Myth, railing against cosmetics, a number of women pointed out quite reasonably, well, Naomi Wolf is so beautiful that she doesn't need to use cosmetics. Most of us are not so lucky. But you notice this in the feminist movement, that you can pretty much tell the reasonableness of any of these women simply by doing a Google image search. And if they are ugly, their political views are going to be ugly as well. Rustin Shackelford says, didn't wealthy people in previous eras have nannies? Well, yes, they did. You've heard the expression, children should be seen and not heard. But the fact is, they knew that their parents were in the house, or at least their mother was in the house, which induces a great deal of stability. No sleep until Breezewood PA says Amy is a class reductionist. She gets technocratic and meme issues right, but she is still a social lib, albeit less forceful than most left podcasters. Doesn't Naomi go at target shooting now, says Oscar Toe. Ashley Main Bravo says, so KMG is implying that pro-abortion feminists are basically bio-Leninists? I would have to do that. I have to think about that. No Sleep says, Roald Dahl spoke greatly of inner and outer beauty. I don't really buy that. That, in a lot of women who are not technically beautiful, you can see, just say in their resting facial expression or in their smile, that they are attractive women. Women like Friedan Firestone Dworkin. Ooh, Andrea Dworkin. Yikes. This is from Kane at Citizen Free Press. Edward Snowden issues warning on Apple. They've taken away that separation between what they own and what you own, and now they're telling your device what to look for. Now they want to search for content already on our devices, even before the information is on their servers, as it was before. They command our devices. We do not know what they are looking for. Even Apple doesn't know specifically. Private companies are now developing methods of hacking phones and then selling them. There is a free market of information in which everyone can access the continuation of us, our phones. I've worked with Apple products when I was in the magazine business, but I've never owned an Apple computer or an Apple phone for several reasons. I just like their whole ethos. Oh, you are a better person if you own an Apple product. Really? How does owning an Apple product make me a better person? Just the smugness of these people. But also, I don't know where Edward Snowden has been. Apple has made it clear that you don't own any of their products, that essentially you are given a license to use it. But if you do anything with your Apple product that we don't like, we will turn it into a brick. And that is not a product that I want to own. So it would appear that the Canadian media is persuading itself that it would not be the worst thing in the world if Aaron O'Toole became prime minister after the upcoming Canadian election. Someone called Andrew Perez, writing for the National Observer. And what do we know about this person, Andrew Perez? He's a Toronto-based public affairs professional whose work includes government relations. Again, there are almost no exceptions to the new Canadian rule that all political opinion must come from PR spivs. And once again, I will say that publications which publish PR spivs should be forced to append at the bottom of their opinion pieces a list of all of the clients that this PR spiv and his company have. Because obviously the potential for conflict of interest is through the roof. Andrew Perez writes, does Erin O'Toole's surge signal the return of red Toryism? Oh, we haven't heard this term red Tories for a long time. Red Toryism was associated with lots of things, but originally it was associated with Canada not becoming the United States. And that part of red Toryism has been simply abandoned. What, you object to every business of any size in Canada being bought by foreigners, mostly Americans? Well, you must be a xenophobe, because it doesn't matter whether Canadians own their own business. Well, the jobs are still there. Well, not all the jobs are still there. If Canadian businesses become branch plants, say, of American companies, then if you want to rise in the management beyond a certain point, you have to leave your country and move to the United States. And all the ancillary services, insurance, legal, travel, all that business goes to American companies. Perez begins his column. As this year's federal election finishes its crucial third week, Conservative leader Erin O'Toole's party continues its surprising, albeit steady, rise in the polls, attracting strong support in almost every region of the country. 2 weeks ago, he entered this campaign as the unmistakable underdog, with expectations of his electoral prospects so low that some respected pollsters even publicly mused his shot at becoming prime minister was next to impossible. But as the age-old political adage goes, campaigns matter. Approaching its midpoint, this campaign's several twists and turns have mostly benefited O'Toole as he leads a highly professionalized, modern, and disciplined campaign. Well, you know, there's the issue of manufactured consent here. That what the media said, particularly through its use, and National Newswatch is the worst in this regard. Oh, let's look at the polls. Let's not look at the, say, the policies of the leaderships, the leaders. Let's just look what the polls say. And the polls at the beginning said, wow, you know, Erin O'Toole doesn't have a chance. Somehow some people managed to resist what the pollsters were saying. And we're going to see that these type of articles like Perez's are going to mean that more people are going to be drawn to Erin O'Toole because the prospect of him becoming prime minister has been validated by the pollsters and the media. Perez continues, but one factor that's played a critical role in O'Toole's early and indisputable momentum has been his unapologetic embrace of traditional progressive conservatism, a brand of Canadian conservatism that dominated federal politics from our nation's founding in 1867 until 1993, when the moderate progressive conservatives fragmented into regional parties based in Western Canada and Quebec. While he cynically positioned himself as a true blue conservative in his successful bid for the Conservative Party's leadership in 2020, O'Toole immediately pivoted to embrace a strain of progressive conservatism we have not witnessed on the federal scene since 2003, when the old PC party merged with the Reformed Canadian Alliance Party to form the Conservative Party of Canada. Yes, you see, Perez is giving away the game here. Erin O'Toole ran as a right-winger and attracted significant right-wing and social conservative support. And then he did what all these people do, like Doug Ford did, for example, and said, get lost, hurry up and die, dinosaurs. But the social conservatives, they never learned their lesson. On the night he unexpectedly won his party's leadership, O'Toole stunned political observers in his victory speech when he made a direct appeal to Indigenous, alphabet people, and racialized Canadians to see themselves reflected in his party. O'Toole's speech that night was remarkable because it was one that never would have been delivered by either of his predecessors, Andrew Scheer or Stephen Harper. Stephen Harper is the man who boasted publicly that he had not reduced immigration levels even during the 2008 to 2010 recession. Stephen Harper, particularly through Jason Kenney, who was immigration minister, pandered to so-called racialized Canadians more than any prime minister had ever done. But let's forget all that. Over the past year, O'Toole has embraced red Toryism in several not-so-subtle ways, including the release of a 2020 Labor Day video message that appealed to unionized workers. Since the election campaign kicked off on August 15th, he has aggressively courted the centrist and center-left voters who made Justin Trudeau prime minister in 2015 and 2019. It's a shrewd strategy that has so far paid obvious political dividends to the underestimated Conservative leader in his national campaign. This has been no more apparent than in seat-rich Ontario, where the party is now statistically tied with Trudeau's Liberals in many polls. Well, much of his party and caucus remain wed to the brand of ultra-conservatism offered by Harper and Scheer over the past 18 years. Oh, yes, I remember when Stephen Harper was prime minister, when the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that prostitution must be legalized, or solicitation of prostitution must be legalized. Why? Well, because if you make solicitation of prostitution a crime, then you're turning prostitutes into criminals. And life is more dangerous to criminals than to non-criminals. And this violates constitutional language on personhood. And the reaction from Stephen Harper's government, nothing. When the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that euthanasia or physician-assisted murder must be made legal, the reaction from Stephen Harper and his Conservatives was nothing. Zero. See, oh yes, this Conservative fellow, he's really so conservative until he isn't. And he never was. Stephen Harper's Conservatives were interested essentially in nothing other than money. The economy, the GDP, well, also, Israel. Gone are the party's previous dog whistles on the niqab and the barbaric cultural practices tip line, nor have Conservatives resorted to their once obsessive refrain on getting tough on crime, or their penchant throughout the Harper era to deliberately and dishonestly characterize carbon pricing as a tax grab. Again, you see what's going on here? Erin O'Toole would make an acceptable prime minister because essentially there is nothing that differentiates himself from Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party. O'Toole now supports a price on carbon and speaks enthusiastically about a compassionate plan to tackle the opioid crisis and the need to treat drug addiction as a health, not a criminal issue. Yes, just like Justin Trudeau, who has essentially decriminalized possession of all drugs in Canada. The government of Canada gives away free, top-quality heroin to people now. And Erin O'Toole has said, yes, me too. Because the solution to people dying of heroin overdoses is to make it easier for people to get heroin. So, yeah, oh, wait. Whether it's on the opioid crisis, Alphabet People Rights, carbon pricing, or the party's enlightened labor policies, Eric Duncan, the party's first openly gay MP and a rising star with impeccable red Tory credentials, has proven very effective in selling the Conservatives' new policies while projecting a sunny disposition that is emblematic of a forward-looking progressive Conservative. Yes, Erin O'Toole represents the final capture of the Conservative Party of Canada by a cabal of gay PR spivs. And golly, it turns out that this Perez fellow is an Alphabet person himself. So now we have Michelle Rempel arguing that poppers need to be legalized in Canada. And we have Erin O'Toole attacking the Liberals because they have not yet eliminated the partial ban on homosexual men donating blood. So how do you know that Erin O'Toole is a good fellow? Because he is more left-wing than the Liberal Party. So Andrew Coyne, who was the closest thing to received wisdom in Canada, he has decided to give Erin O'Toole his own imprimatur. That, let's see, he talks about a Trudeau deciding that, oh, yes, people are booing me and my campaign stops. I'm a victim. Poor, poor, pitiful me. Vote Liberal. Coyne writes that the mob's behavior, seething with rage, chanting obscenities, some uttering racist slurs, even threats, was appalling, is not in dispute. There is no excusing this conduct or the hatred from which it springs. Oh, yes, the government of Canada or various provincial governments decide that they are going to institute medical apartheid in this country, that if you don't get double or triple or quadruple jabbed in the future, you will be essentially a non-person. I can't imagine why that would inspire rage. But if you don't think the Liberals spotted an opportunity in this, a heaven-sent life-saving opportunity, you must be new to this game. Indeed, Liberal partisans were fairly gushing with excitement at the opening this presented, a chance to change the subject from the thousands of Afghan nationals Canada abandoned after the fall of Kabul. Yes, as if anyone cares about that. Or the callousness of calling an election in the middle of it, or the sour and sullen tone of the Liberal campaign. And a funny thing about Andrew Coyne, about once a year, he writes a column saying, all the parties are the same. And what's wrong with the Conservative Party? They're just, parroting the Liberals. But then Coyne writes this. It's fair to say that the Tories have a history of flirting with the populist right. Boo! I should know. I've written at least a dozen pieces criticizing them for it. It's also true that vaccine hesitant are disproportionately represented among their supporters. And it's certainly true that a subset of these have been radicalized, part of the general climate of unreason fueled by social media. Yes, don't look at social media. Read Andrew Coyne at the Globe and Mail. So yes, Coyne seems to be telling us that, yes, I am perfectly all right with the prospect of Erin O'Toole becoming prime minister. And, when people like Perez and Coyne essentially endorse Erin O'Toole, it tells you everything you need to know about them, that they are controlled, that the Conservative Party is controlled opposition. And these so-called, extreme right-wingers in the Tory caucus, well, they won't be given cabinet posts, and the rest of them will be told to shut up or else. We'll kick you out of caucus and make sure you can never run for the party again. Already during this campaign, a Conservative Party candidate for the Yukon, he was bounced because of his vaccine hesitancy. In American news, this is from Matthew Boyle at Breitbart. Former President Donald Trump told Breitbart exclusively he thinks there's something wrong with his successor, President Joe Biden, as evidenced by Biden's cognitive impairment on public display. I don't think you'll face Biden, Trump said of 2024. Biden's not an old man, by the way. He is. But there's something wrong. But he's not an old man. He's going to be 79. That is not that old. Well, it is, actually. I know people that are much older than that, and they're sharp as they were 40 years ago. Biden is not an old person. They talk about age. If you're in your 70s or even your 80s, I know so many people, even in their 90s, like Bernie Marcus of Home Depot, and so many others, they're in their 90s and sharp as can be. But something is wrong. Something is going wrong there. I don't like to predict that far forward. It's such a long time, and I don't know. Things are happening left and right. So that leaves Kamala Harris, who Jim Kunstler called the poison pill inserted by the Democratic Party. This is from Noah Bierman at the LA Times. Susan Giffen, a Democratic voter who lives in one of the nation's most important political swing districts, said Vice President Kamala Harris is savvy, asks perceptive questions, and would make a good president. But Giffen, a 69-year-old retiree from New Hope, Pennsylvania, believes it will never happen. Absolutely not, she said, while running errands before an afternoon swim. I'd vote for her, but I don't think she can win, and I wouldn't vote for her in a primary. Giffen worries Harris's political growth has been stymied by a series of no-win assignments from President Biden, and that Harris cannot overcome the country's sexism. Yes, this is, they're going with the Hillary Clinton line here. Why aren't I, 100 points ahead? Oh, it's because Americans are sexist. It's not a good idea to look at the electorate as enemies, which essentially Hillary Clinton did, and Kamala Harris certainly does. How about the fact that she doesn't seem to be a serious person? That, yes, she cackles too much. A fourth called her a joke, who put in her job as a trophy. It's impossible to quantify how much of Harris's political struggles are the result of racism and sexism, both blatant and subtle, and how many stem from her actions and personal qualities. Yes. Every time a female politician, Margaret Thatcher was hated by millions, probably tens of millions of people in Britain. Was this the result of sexism? No. Because Margaret Thatcher was an evil woman. So it's perfectly acceptable to make fun of her, her hair, the way she speaks, the way she dresses, etc., again, because she's an evil person. Whereas Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris are on the side of good. So if you don't like them, you're sexist. Let's return to Joseph Tainter and his 1988 book, The Collapse of Complex Societies. And in this section, he describes various types of early states. Clayson and Skalnick distinguish various types of early states. They are, one, the inchoate early state. In this type, kinship, family, and community ties still dominate political relations. There is limited full-time specialization, ad hoc taxation, and reciprocity and direct contacts between ruler and ruled. Two, the typical early state. Kinship in this variety is balanced by ties to locality, competition, and appointment, counterbalance heredity. Leading administrative roles are allocated to non-kinsmen, and redistribution and reciprocity dominate relations between strata. Three, the transitional early state. Kinship in this final category affects only marginal aspects of government. The administrative apparatus is dominated by appointed officials, and market economies and overtly antagonistic social classes develop with the emergence of private ownership of the means of production. There are aspects to this subdivision that are both intriguing and disturbing. Just as Webb's identification of conditional states makes us doubt whether monopoly of force really is a criterion of statehood, so the concept of inchoate and typical early states raises questions about the subordination of kinship as a characteristic of states. We have been told that states are distinctive because, among other things, they are based on class rather than kinship and enjoy a monopoly of force. Now we learn that some states do indeed have these characteristics, but some states only partially have them. It begins to sound as if state formation is not such a great divide after all. There are apparently continuities in the transition from tribal to state societies, continuities even in those characteristics thought to be most peculiar to states. Cohen is correct in noting that state formation is a continuous development. There is no clear-cut state, non-state dividing line. While asserting that there is indeed a structural rift between tribal and state societies, Webb lists the facts that contradict this view. He notes of chiefdoms and states that, quote, on a day-to-day basis, the two social types do much the same sort of thing, and in the short run can produce the same kinds of results in terms of the establishment of public order, dispute resolution, defense against external enemies, monumental erection, public works, record keeping, the provision of luxury goods, and the support of marked distinctions of rank, unquote. The difference between chiefdoms and states, notes Webb, is that in regard to such things as size and complexity, chiefdoms peak where states begin. It was noted in the first chapter that to define collapse is actually quite a complex matter, and that such a definition would be developed throughout the work, but not completed until the final chapter. The foregoing discussion leads to installment number 2. As the development of complexity is a continuous variable, so is its reverse. Collapse is a process of decline in complexity. Although collapse is usually thought of as something that afflicts states, In fact, it is not limited to any type of society or level of complexity. It occurs anytime established complexity rapidly, noticeably, and significantly declines. Collapse is not merely the fall of empires or the expiration of states. It is not limited either to such phenomena as the decentralizations of chiefdoms. Collapse may also manifest itself in a transition from larger to smaller states, from more to less complex chiefdoms, or in the abandonment of settled village life for mobile foraging, where this is accompanied by a drop in complexity. The typological approach has the flaw of obscuring social variation and change within a typological level, so that only social change between levels can be recognized and addressed. Abandonment of the typological approach admits a whole range of interesting and significant social transformations. A prime example is the development of complex chiefdoms and periodic reversions to smaller chiefdoms, as in the islands of Polynesia. The collapse of a society that was not organized as a state, e.g. the Chacoans, will be one of the major examples discussed in Chapter 5. And tomorrow, I will continue with Joseph Tainter's The Collapse of Complex Societies when he discusses the evolution of complexity. Let's go back to the chat. Okay. Okay, Popcasso 88. Yeah, I knew someone was going to make a joke about monumental and the word that follows. Let's see. Oscar Toe says, last two Perry Mason, no lie. The dudes break down in the stand and admit to murder because they couldn't stand their nagging wives. You know, it seemed to me that a whole generation of Americans and Canadians had their view about law, criminal law, largely formed by watching Perry Mason. Now, in this alternate universe, the lawyer, the defense lawyer, is essentially a private detective. That the cases are decided not on the basis of law, but always on facts, and facts which are produced, or witnesses that are produced at the last minute. Now, of course, such has been the evolution of discovery that there are no longer any surprises in criminal trials. But no, Perry Mason has to discover who the real killer is. And of course, it's very amusing watching the show to realize you do not want to make the acquaintance of Perry Mason. Because if you do, you will almost certainly shortly either be murdered or be charged with murder. But, you know, the resolution, you know, it's a guessing game. Okay, we know that the accused cannot be guilty because Perry Mason is defending him. So who is the actual murderer? And usually there's something like 4, 5, or 6 different people who could be the murderer. And often it's revealed that it's completely out of left field choice. These people all confess on the stand. Apparently they don't know about the Fifth Amendment to the, you know, to Constitution. That why are you admitting that you committed murder? Because now you are going to be sent to prison. If you just kept your mouth shut, none of this would happen. But it's always my favorite when someone, you know, stands up in the gallery and, you know, in a very emotional way says, I did it. I did it. I shot John Jenkins. I couldn't stand the way he treated you, the way they all treated you. I love you, Myrna. I always have. Yeah. People willingly putting themselves in prison in this way. That it's too funny. It's just too funny. And that, you know, when Perry sends off his you know, private investigator, Paul, find out these things. And, you know, he's back within 24 hours, and Paul Drake, he's found out everything, right? And it's not that easy to find information, you know, particularly not in those days. But this guy is just the best in the world. Perry is often seems to be needlessly cruel towards him. Nope, you know, I know that it's 11:30 at night, but you need to get on this right now. But on the other hand, Paul seems to have a very pleasing private life. That guy's always having a good time. So let's talk about, yes, that subject again. This is from Kane at Citizen Free Press. Aspen Clinic refuses to test Candace Owens. Yeah, I was banned from taking a COVID test because of my politics. So I'm no longer allowed to comply with COVID measures and responsibly test myself for COVID because they don't like my politics in Aspen. Yes, very, very amusing. But of course, the response to that, oh, this is a private business, and private business should be able to do whatever it likes, except when, it decides that it's not going to force vaccine passports on its employees, say. And we have, we're going to see more and more examples of this, and it's pleasing to see. This is from the same source, Citizen Free Press. Enough is enough. Students stage walkout at Denver High School over mask zombie rule. The walkout started when 3 students emerged from Legend High School in Parker and meandered toward a nearby park. 2 more followed shortly after, and for a moment, the small group was the only sign of protest. Then came dozens, and within minutes, hundreds of students and parents had amassed across the street from the high school. They held signs calling masks child abuse, public health officials liars, and demanded masks remain optional. The Tri-County Health Department on August the 30th rescinded the opt-out ability of Adams, Arapahoe, and Douglas counties for a previous mask order that applied to children ages 2 to 11, then expanded the order to include all children over 2. And, Joe Rogan. Well, you knew he was going to be part of this, right? I mean, he would have to be. This is from the Washington Post. Tisk, tisk, tisk. They're not happy with Joe Rogan. This is from, I can't pronounce this name, Ilah Izadi and Emily Yar. Joe Rogan, host of a wildly popular podcast who has downplayed the need for coronavirus vaccines, announced Wednesday that he has tested positive for the coronavirus. In a brief video, Rogan told his 13.1 million Instagram followers that he returned home from the road Saturday night. He's currently on tour and just performed a series of comedy shows in Florida, feeling weary with a headache. Just to be cautious, I separated from my family, slept in a different part of the house, and throughout the night, I got fevers and sweats. And I knew what was going on, Rogan said, so I got up in the morning, got tested, and turns out I got COVID. Rogan said he was now feeling great after one bad day on Sunday. After his diagnosis, he said he immediately threw the kitchen sink at the virus and listed a litany of therapeutics and treatments he tried, including ivermectin, a medicine used to kill parasites in animals and humans, but best known as a horse dewormer. The treatment is one that has been promoted by conservative media figures, politicians, and some doctors, but it also carries a warning from the Food and Drug Administration, which has advised against using it as a treatment for COVID-19. Poison control centers have reported huge spikes of calls about ivermectin exposure. You are not a horse. You are not a cow. Seriously, y'all. Stop it, the FDA tweeted last month amid an increase of people getting sick from the medicine. So the FDA is now saying y'all, because the FDA is like your next door neighbor. He sits there on his porch in a rocking chair, drinking a Coke, just a regular guy. Doctors dismayed by patients who fear coronavirus vaccines but clamor for unproven ivermectin. The Joe Rogan Experience is the most popular podcast in the country, according to tracking firm Edison Research. In 2020, Spotify acquired Rogan's podcast library in a reported $100 million deal and now exclusively licenses the series. Before he moved to Spotify, Rogan's show had about 190 million monthly downloads. Rogan, a stand-up comedian, is a lightning rod with a huge following. He's hosted controversial figures on his show, including Alex Jones, who has pushed the false theory that the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting was a hoax. Spotify eventually deleted 40 episodes from its service, including ones featuring Jones and provocateur Milo Greek name. During the pandemic, Rogan has used his platform to flirt with coronavirus misinformation. In April, he said young and healthy people don't need to get vaccinated. After an outcry, he told his audience not to take his advice seriously, saying he's not an anti-vax person or a doctor, but rather a moron. But months later on his podcast, he lambasted the push for mass vaccinations and also questioned whether the vaccines actually prevented the spread of the virus, even as he couched his remarks, saying this is neither pro nor con of vaccine. Public health experts have said that the vaccines are the most effective way of preventing the spread of the virus and are effective at preventing people from getting very sick and dying from COVID-19, including the Delta variant. Rogan also slammed vaccine requirements for event spaces in New York City and said that he would offer refunds to anyone who had tickets to his Madison Square Garden show this fall and didn't want to comply, saying that he wasn't going to force anyone to get vaccinated to see a stupid comedy show. His comments have attracted pushback from White House officials. Anthony S. Fauci. Where did the S come from? I must have seen the name Anthony Fauci, 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 times over since February of last year. And now the Washington Post has inserted an S in the middle. I wonder if it's like Harry Truman's initial, Harry S. Truman. Malcolm Muggeridge, the late journalist, once interviewed Harry Truman's mother and asked what the S stands for, and she replied that it stands for nothing. So Anthony S. Fauci, the country's highest-ranking expert on infectious diseases, criticized Rogan's comments during an April interview on NBC's Today Show, emphasizing that young and healthy people should absolutely get vaccinated and that it was unvaccinated individuals who are propagating the outbreak. And yeah. So who's dying of COVID? Well, people with comorbidities, as they call them. And the major comorbidity is morbid obesity. But let's not talk about that because it's fat phobic. This is again from the Washington Post from Jonathan Edwards. Vaccines and masks won't save us from the pandemic, Jonathan Neiman wrote, but the Sweet Green CEO has a solution: outlaw junk food. Neiman, whose chain of 100-plus restaurants sells salads for $10 to $15 a pop, published a LinkedIn post Tuesday suggesting that obesity is the root cause of health problems, including severe coronavirus infections. 78% of hospitalizations due to COVID are obese and overweight people. Is there an underlying problem that perhaps we have not given enough attention to, he wrote, appearing to cite March Centers for Disease Control COVID-19 hospitalization data. Neiman concluded that COVID will be around for the foreseeable future, and therefore people have to find a way to coexist with the virus. Quote, we cannot run away from it, and no vaccine or mask will save us. In full disclosure, I am vaccinated and support others to get vaccinated. Our best bet is to learn how to best live with it and focus on overall health versus preventing infection. You know, it's significant to me that this Neiman's view is now appearing in a mainstream regime media outlet such as the Washington Post. It tells me that perhaps the tide is beginning to turn here. Alex Berenson, of course, has been banned from Twitter, but he is still up on Substack, and you can get pretty much everything he writes on Substack, not all, but pretty much everything for free, at least currently, and I highly recommend it. It's at alexberenson.substack.com. He has a post, Firefighters Against Mandatory COVID Vaccinations. 3 in Washington, D.C. explain why they don't want the vaccine or mandates. A firefighter in Washington, D.C. recently contacted me about the city's plans to require all firefighters to be vaccinated against COVID or fired. That was my line in the sand, he wrote. I've been quiet throughout this whole COVID-19 nonsense, but now I'm speaking out. Washington firefighters are also emergency medical technicians or paramedics, so a city order requiring healthcare workers to receive at least one vaccine dose by September 30th covers them. The deadline is 4 weeks from today. Hundreds of firefighters are trying to decide what to do. The anti-mandate firefighters estimate that about 40% of the department has not been vaccinated. Without them, the department will barely be able to function and will likely have to go to what firefighters call a 3 or 2 platoon system. Normally, the department works on a 4-platoon system, meaning firefighters work one 24-hour shift and then have 3 days off. In a 3-platoon system, they have 2 days off. In a 2-platoon system, they have only 1 day to recover after each 24-hour shift. It's pretty much insanity to do that long term. It's reserved for emergencies, the firefighter wrote. But because of the process of hiring and training new firefighters takes so long, the department would have little choice. So why are these firefighters, who as EMTs treated many people with COVID firsthand, so opposed to being required to take the vaccine? I sent along questions, which 3 firefighters answered: a relatively junior paramedic, an EMT with about a decade of experience, and a long-serving captain. Here are their answers. I've cut for space, but otherwise left them unchanged. What are the main reasons that people are hesitant to get the vaccine? The captain said many of us have had COVID, and according to the latest science, are anywhere from 6.5 to 13 times less likely to contract the Delta variant than a solely vaccinated person. At this rate, the more major threat would be from the rare side effects of a new and still very early vaccine. Others also have a religious objection. All of the current vaccines were developed using tissue from aborted fetal tissue. A lot of firefighters are religious people and feel very strongly about this aspect. There is also the general mistrust of an obviously rushed process from a government that is not always honest, to say the least, and has a history of exploiting certain groups of people in medical experimentation. Many also worry about what happens next if this is allowed. What will our employers force on us next as a condition of being able to provide for our families? Healthcare workers and first responders appear to be refusing the vaccine at higher rates than the general public. What should the rest of us make of that hesitancy? Berenson asked. The paramedic responded, "We are not afraid. We put our lives at risk every day. We've worked through the pandemic when most others were staying home. We see firsthand that very few healthy, active individuals are getting severely ill with COVID-19. So let's take a look at the Daily Skeptic, formerly Lockdown Skeptics. And UK decision on COVID jabs for children expected imminently. Children not showing symptoms of COVID should stay at home, says Oxford professor. Bring back self-isolation for children if cases rise in schools, says Teaching Union. COVID cases fell in 4/5 of areas in England. In England, the COVID epidemic has de facto ended. Here's what that means. The exponential growth we saw in the 2020 waves, with more and more hospitalization each week for an extended period, is no longer possible, writes Andrew Lillico in The Telegraph. Get a grip. Why are we still afraid of handshakes? COVID paranoia has seen us jettison life's simple pleasures, with the traditional greeting going the same way as tea at the hairdresser's, writes Hannah Betts in The Telegraph. You know, Aaron O'Toole, the Conservative Party leader, insists on this ridiculous elbow bump, as does Jason Kenney and Justin Trudeau. PCR testing is a criminal offense under Canadian law, expert lawyer says. A constitutional rights lawyer says that PCR tests are being used to identify individuals with COVID are illegal to require and or administer per Canadian law, reports Life Site. And this is a tweet from Julia at Talk Radio. Professor of evidence-based medicine Carl Hennigan criticizes media scaremongering over COVID data following the bank holiday. Their headlines drive the clickbait of what's happening. It's unhelpful and having impacts on society and how they behave. Booster jabs risk permanent state of lockdown, says Professor Sunitra Gupta. She's professor of theoretical epidemiology at Oxford University and a founding member of the Great Barrington Declaration. Said there is no case for a full rollout of COVID vaccine booster doses. Writing in The Telegraph, she suggests that while it is reasonable to offer the extremely vulnerable a booster jab, it can be to no one else's individual gain to submit to a third jab, having already reduced the risk of severe disease, which was very small in the first place for most, by receiving 2 inoculations. Scottish opposition and business leaders criticize Sturgeon, that would be Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister of Scotland's vaccine passport plans. UK school closures lasted longer than in any other European country, but one during lockdowns. Why Michael Gove's night out in Aberdeen is good news for opponents of vaccine passports. Yes, the recently divorced or separated from his wife, Gove, cabinet minister, was seen, how would I put it, as they used to say, boogalooing in a nightclub in Aberdeen, Scotland. A pro forma legal letter for parents of 12 to 15-year-olds who don't want them to get jabbed. Professor Sir Terence Stevenson spins his new study to exaggerate long COVID and trivialize the impact of lockdowns on children. So let's go to the chat here. Electric Boogaloo, yes. Visionary Companion says, I do not mind cat-human head bumps, but fist bumps I do not do. I've never been a Jogro convict. Jogro? Fist bumps. Yes. Are we still doing that? It seems this is of a previous decade or a couple of decades ago. Oscar Toe says, you can go on Wiki and see millions of people have taken the eye drug safely. I also do not talk to people who wear sunglasses. Very Afghan of me, said Red Sulfur. Well, I wear sunglasses. I suppose I have sensitive eyes, and I'm subject to sunstroke. But I know that Kingsley Amos, he hated sunglasses so much that whenever he saw someone on a London street waiting to cross the street wearing sunglasses, he would take the person by the elbow and start leading them across the street as if they were blind. Let's see. Deborah says, Pfizer ex-VP went nuts last night calling Pfizer employees ruthless criminals. Visionary Companion says, I prefer you lot because it is derisive. Ogan's Iron says, guessing y'all was eventually invented to redistinguish the second plural that merged with the second singular. Contracu says, if COVID-19 is the threat that the left proposes it is, then they should be exploring every possible treatment option, but they aren't. Well, again, the point I've been making for the longest time, yes, look at what's available and cheap, and, let's see whether it works. Because that would be a good thing, right? No, apparently it is. It's a bad thing. Apparently, it's a bad thing. Contra Cruz says the left's position against treatments is utterly bizarre and indefensible. These are cheap, generic, FDA-approved medications with mild side effects. De Boreas says, in Israel, only 42 out of 300,000 with natural immunity found reinfected with Delta. Many fully vaccinated in hospitals are critically ill. Well, I don't think that the media in North America is going to be able to keep up the narrative for much longer that the biology of people in Israel and England is significantly different than the biology of people, say, in Canada and the United States. No, I expect that is going to collapse, and soon. He has a good chance to beat Sarah Jessica Parker. What are we talking about here? I don't want to pick on Sarah Jessica Parker. I've noticed she has a certain talent for playing idiots in movies, such as the role of the actress that she played in David Mamet's State and Maine. But we have been gaslighted for decades now that she is an attractive woman. Even after the extensive plastic surgery that she has had over the years, she is not an attractive woman. But that didn't stop her from being hired, as a spokesmodel for one of the leading cosmetological companies. But then, they decided, these makeup companies, decided, no, we don't want to show beautiful women anymore. Well, why not? People like looking at beautiful women, not just men, but women too. It's aspirational. That's why women buy makeup. That's why they spend all of this money on haircuts and hair products and the like, because they think, if I spend enough money, I could be as beautiful as the woman on the cover or the woman in the ad. Now, it's not true, but, these companies went with that for over 100 years, and it worked very well for them. I mean, if the message is, if you spend all of this money on various treatments and tinctures and the like, you can be as good looking as Sarah Jessica Parker. That's not very aspirational, is it? Oh, Okay. Sunglasses go with taking LSD on a sunny day like milk and cookies, says the Texas Feral Hog. Okay. Well, I've never taken LSD, and I don't drink milk. Okay. He was a Canuck. What are we talking about? The Sunglasses at Night, that Corey fellow. Greatest bad pop song ever. I have to see what the eyes are doing, said Red Sulfur. Yes, Corey Hart was indeed a Canadian from Montreal, if memory serves. So, forgive me while I open a bunch of tabs here. I'm moving on to Theater Thursday, and I'm talking tonight about a documentary. I think it's only the second documentary that I have discussed on Theater Thursday. And it is from 2013, and it's a documentary about John Milius, directed by Joey Figueroa and Zach Knutson. John Milius being a director, producer, and writer, and I suppose you could call him a provocateur. Milius was born in 1944, and he was a part of the Barbarians, the auteurs of the New Hollywood in 1970. I mean, all the other people there, Lucas and Spielberg and the like, they all looked up to John Milius. And they thought that, he was likely to go the furthest of them, which did not happen. And that is one of the major themes of this documentary. The reason it did not happen was because of his politics, John Milius's politics. I should mention straight up that this is a very entertaining documentary. I found myself laughing out loud many, many times. When Conan the Barbarian was being cast, that Milius was talking to the producer, at the studio, or studio exec. And Milius said, Arnold Schwarzenegger. I want Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was, known as a muscle man at that time. And the producer said, no. Have Arnold Schwarzenegger in a movie? So he said, okay. So who else? Like, what's your second choice? And Milius, he goes like this, Dustin Hoffman. I laughed loud at that. And so the producer decided to acquiesce to Milius's wish to have a Schwarzenegger star and Conan the Barbarian. And we know what happened, that Schwarzenegger became the biggest star in the movies. But of course, I'm reminded that in the trailer for Sam Peckinpah's Straw Dogs, which stars Dustin Hoffman, it speaks of unleashing Dustin Hoffman, which is very amusing. Don't you think? Unleashing Dustin Hoffman. Wow, that is going to be awesome. Actually, I love Straw Dogs, although I have argued on previous Theater Thursday that Dustin Hoffman is actually the villain of the piece. Everything that he touches turns to death. But back to John Milius. I'll say there's a couple of things that are missing from this documentary. There is almost no discussion of Milius's private life. He's been married 3 times. That never comes up. Although we spend a lot of time listening to his children, a son and a daughter, who are very fond of their old man. And his daughter seems to be, the keeper of the flame. She was absolutely furious when Schwarzenegger posed with the Vindman brothers using a Conan, and they had a Conan-like sword. And Milius's daughter was absolutely livid about this. How dare they? Now, the second thing which is missing from this documentary is the fact that John Milius is a Jew. Well, why is this significant? Well, because, conservatives are very rare in Hollywood. Conservative Jews are almost unknown. Well, how many are there? Well, there's John Milius and there's David Mamet. And I don't think it's a coincidence that after Mamet published an essay in the Village Voice called Why I'm No Longer a Brain Dead Liberal, his movie career suddenly vanished. You know? Lawrence Gordon, a former studio exec who appears in the film, and is rather condescending towards Milius. There's a famous story about him that Gordon once ranted at Milius, "You're not a Jew, you're a goddamn Nazi." Yes, that's how controversial it is to be a Jewish right-winger in Hollywood. Now, of course, it's been pointed out, and it's pointed out several times in the documentary, that John Milius loves stirring up trouble. He's an early example of what we now call a troll. That he says things that maybe he half believes or maybe he doesn't believe at all. And that since he was made a monster figure after his 1984 film Red Dawn, he decided to embrace it, which was perhaps a mistake because after Red Dawn, he was able to make only 2 movies, certainly not with the budgets that he'd had before, and then that was that. There's a touching scene in the movie where Milius decides that he wants to be a staff writer on Deadwood, and David Milch, the showrunner, was having none of it. Not because he didn't like Milius, but this isn't going to work. I can't see you as a staff writer. And so Milius says, look, my son is in law school and I need the money. Well, why did he need the money? Because his accountant had stolen about $3 million from him. And I think there's a lesson to be learned from this. You don't want to be friends with your accountant, that you want to keep this on a strictly professional level. Because there's just so many cases. Oh, yeah, my accountant, he's the best guy. And then it turns out that he's robbed you blind. But in any event, Milch said that, okay, I'll pay for it. And Milius said, well, it's 3 years, And Milch said, I'll pay for it. And then Ed O'Neill said, he said, Milch told me the damnedest thing happened. That after Milius had got the HBO series Rome, which he was the co-creator of Greenlighted, he paid back David Milch. And Milch said, that's never happened before. But Milius is, there's lots of great people in this. Pretty much anyone that you would expect to talk about John Milius is in this movie. Milius gave it his full cooperation. You've got De Palma, Coppola, Clint Eastwood, Sam Elliott, Harrison Ford, Kathleen Kennedy, Randall Kleiser, George Lucas, Michael Mann, Mike McAvoy, Elvis Mitchell, who says some very perceptive things. He's a film critic. The aforementioned Ed O'Neill, Al Ruddy, Paul Schrader, Schwarzenegger, Martin Scorsese, Charlie Sheen, Spielberg, Stallone, Oliver Stone, Leah Thompson, Matt Weiner. They all seem to have a great respect for Milius, perhaps because he's made the kind of films, he's always made the kind of films that he wants to make. I mean, that's what an auteur does. I mean, you can see with Spielberg, for example, that a lot of the movies that he's made are clearly task work. I want to work. What was that? He made a movie, Spielberg made a movie about a novel about video games. Was it Zero Player One or something like that? And what they joked on Red Letter Media that there is so little live action in this film that Spielberg was probably on set for a day because the rest is just CGI. But Sam Elliott gets to the heart of this right at the beginning. He says of Milius, He doesn't write for pussies and he doesn't write for women. He writes for men because he's a man. Well, there's not very many movies like that made anymore. That I suppose there's lots of movies. You know, all the Marvel movies and DC movies, they are made for men, but for man children. People who think that comic books or video games are the finest expression of art. And Milius is interested, for all the Sturm und Drang of Milius's film, he is clearly greatly interested, in people and their feelings. And what's important to Milius? Duty, honor, loyalty, what it means to be a man. Coincidentally, these are the very same things that motivate David Mamet. Milius went to film school at USC, and is pointed out in the documentary, there were only 3 film schools in the United States at the time: USC, UCLA, and at NYU. Milius went to film school because he originally wanted to be a warrior, and he was very much looking forward to fighting in Vietnam. And it sounds crazy, but there were a fair amount of people at the time that wanted to do this. This feeling, I suppose, a particularly American feeling, that there's a war every generation, and one of these wars is going to be my war. Well, John Milius, he tried to be inducted by the Marines, and he was rejected because he had asthma. Now, I suppose, later in the Vietnam War, as, we discovered, they would take almost anybody, regardless of medical conditions or IQ. I suppose you could compare Milius to Mishima in this respect, that Mishima weaseled out of joining the Japanese army in 1945, and he felt guilty about it for the rest of his life. And one could argue, well, certainly many have, that it was this guilt that transformed him into a super militarist. And I suppose you could say the same thing about John Milius. His first big influence, his greatest filmic influence, was Akira Kurosawa. That he went to a Kurosawa Film Festival. Yes, imagine that. And he saw, I don't know, a couple of dozen of his films. And, so that's what a director does. This is what I want to do. So I'll go to film school. And he was already, kind of a star at USC. That his name was in an account of USC Film School, in the Daily Reporter, is that what it's called? And all the other members, many of whom became famous, were rather awestruck by this. I mean, clearly, Milius has been tipped for the top. So after Milius graduated, he did what a lot of people did in those days, was that he got involved in making B pictures. Not with Roger Corman, but with American International Pictures, or AIP, who were having a tremendous run of success with exploitation movies in the late 1960s, typically revolving around drugs, hippies, bikers, drugs. Let's make a movie about how wicked drugs are, but let's kind of make it ambiguous enough so that you could look at this movie and say, wow, so apparently if you take drugs, you're having fun all the time and you're having sex with these really good looking women. Milius went to work writing for AIP and knockoffs, exploitation films. And Milius had grand ambitions, from the start. He wanted to become an auteur, like John Ford was an example that he gave. So he wrote a script for Jeremiah Johnson, which was eventually filmed, though not by him. It was directed by Sidney Pollack and starred Robert Redford. And so Milius said, I want to direct. And they said, no, we don't want you to direct. And eventually it came down to that he would get a very small amount if he directed the film, which they didn't want him to do, but a very large amount if he just wrote on it. And he got $90,000, which is worth what? About $1.8 million today. That is very impressive, particularly from a man who had no track record. So he did this. He wrote the script, The Life and Times of Judge Roy Bean, and again, he wanted to direct it, but no, the studio didn't want him to direct it. So John Huston directed it, and it starred Paul Newman. And Milius says in the documentary, that he is he's nothing but respect for Paul Newman, but he was the wrong choice, and Huston was the wrong choice. Part of Milius's legend is because of his script doctoring. There are lots of directors who you wonder why they make so few films and how they can make a living. If they make so few films, is that it's now become commonplace in Hollywood for a troublesome or just crummy script to be offered to people like John Milius and say, punch this up. Can you? And Milius took a lot of that work, I suppose most famously, on Dirty Harry. Milius says, you can figure out which are my scenes in the films. Well, the ones, with the violence in them, and also with the catchphrases such as, do you feel lucky, punk? Well, do you? And that's, that is such a beautiful bracketing of the film. I mentioned this before, but I'm going to say it again because it's so impressive. You notice the first time that Clint Eastwood utters this iconic line, he has this smile on his face. He's holding a gun on this wounded, black man on the street. He seems like he doesn't have a worry in the world. And then you notice that he says it again at the end of the movie, and the effect is completely different because he has just become deranged with hatred. And he spits the line out with this, deformed face. Do you feel lucky, punk? Well, do you? It's really frightening to watch. And then, to me, the final scene where he throws his badge into the water, there have been many interpretations of that, but my interpretation is that he throws the badge away because he realizes that he has become too angry to be a policeman. So he works with Coppola on Apocalypse Now, and I'll get to that. But of course, he made a film for AIP called Dillinger, which is about the bank robber, John Dillinger. And he's played by the great Warren Oates and Melvin Purvis. The G-Man, who was after him, was played by the great Ben Johnson. And this movie got a lot of attention and made money. So, it proved that Milius could make a film, a real film that was a success. Now, of course, Milius also script doctored Jaws. And Richard Dreyfuss tells the story that Spielberg wanted a speech, a rousing speech for Robert Shaw's character about the USS Indianapolis. So this was a subject that was dear to Milius's heart. So he wrote 10 pages, a 10-page monologue. And Spielberg, Shaw decided, I can't memorize, 10 pages of dialogue. And of course, Robert Shaw, who was a, award-winning novelist and playwright himself, pared it down to 5 minutes. And that's the 5 minutes that you hear in the movie. And so The Wind and the Lion, which is characterized by Walter Murch as, a crazy movie. And of course, you have Sean Connery as a Moroccan leader or a Berber leader. Yeah, and of course, we all become used to this. Whatever role Sean Connery is in, he speaks the same way. Like he plays an Irish unionist in the Molly Maguires, and there's no attempt by him to put on an Irish accent. Nope, he speaks with his Scottish brogue. And of course, in the submarine movie, he did The Hunt for Red October. He's playing a Russian naval officer, and again, you get the same voice. I don't know. I don't really have a problem with that because there's few things worse in a movie than someone attempting a foreign accent and making a botch of it. Milius was a surfer. He was quite a serious surfer until about the age of 50. And he loved surfing. And he loved the surfing culture. It was very much Americana to him, just as much as, say, Judge Roy Bean or Liver Eating Johnson. And so he decided to make a movie about surfing, which was called Big Wednesday, which now become a cult film. And it died. And it died, as explained in the movie, because Warner Brothers at that time was essentially, parceling out films that it had made for distribution. And so there was no publicity for this movie, such that it had a budget of $11 million and it only took in $4.5 million at the box office. But, working with producers, studio heads, there's lots of great stuff in this documentary about this. The old studio head, someone like Daryl Zanuck, people used to complain about his interference in films, but Daryl Zanuck knew films and he loved films. Now the people at the studios are pretty much accountants. So the script, the final shooting script for Big Wednesday is delivered to the studio, and there comes a note back from an executive. This is too grandiose. There's all this grandiosity in this film. We want you to dial it down. And, here are the pages, we've made them blue that we want you to replace. And Milius said, to his partner, you know what I'm going to do here? I'm just going to send the same script back. And where they have demanded, changes be made on the blue pages, I'm just going to make those pages blue. So he sent it to the studio and he gets a note back. Yes, outstanding. This is exactly what we wanted, because it was clear that they'd never read the script, that they just wanted to interfere. And so, yes, as I say, that is an excellent lesson. Of course, I suppose most people know Milius for his role as a screenwriter, the original screenwriter for Apocalypse Now, which was then rewritten by Coppola, the director. And obviously, there's lots of great stuff in Apocalypse Now, but I think it's a failure as a movie. I would have been interested to see what Milius would have done with the material. It is supposed to be about a man following the Conrad novel who is driven mad by the jungle. Instead, Coppola gets Martin Sheen drunk as a skunk in a hotel room, whereupon Martin Sheen is incited to destroy a mirror with his hands and his feet, with the loss of blood that one would expect. So we see that the movie is unbalanced from the beginning because Martin Sheen is crazy from the very beginning. Also, casting Marlon Brando, absolutely disastrous. He weighed about 300 pounds at that time. And Brando famously was not about to, learn lines. And he looked so grotesque that you notice, if you watch the film, that you see very little of Marlon Brando. I mean, these were the days where he just wanted a paycheck, you know. And for some reason, I mean, there are better actors around, actors who are actually going to try, you know. But Brando kept being hired, you know. So let's go to Conan the Barbarian, which I mentioned before, which was a big hit and started the Schwarzenegger cult. But we're going to move on to Red Dawn, which came out in 1984, which is one of my very favorite films. And I had a kind of epiphany about Hollywood, the media, the elite, with regard to this film. Not so much the film itself, but looking at it in a meta way. Because I'd read the reviews, and there's some of the most savage reviews that I've ever seen in my life were attached to this movie. Fascist, disgusting, fascist, etc. So I watched the movie and I found it very moving. It's the story of a communist, a Soviet and Cuban invasion of the United States. And so foreign soldiers land in Colorado, and they take people prisoner. They shoot up everything in sight. And a bunch of, 8 children, really, high school students, they decamp to the woods and start a guerrilla war against the invaders. So and it's not, there are raw moments in this film, but it becomes darker and more downbeat as it progresses and ends in an exceedingly sad way. But the point is that these young people were willing to fight and die for their country. And what the critics were telling me was that apparently this is fascism. This is disgusting. And my epiphany from this was that our elite, our intelligentsia, are traitorous scum. I mean, Red Dawn is a universal movie. It would play just as well if it were about a bunch of Russian teenagers deciding to defend their country against an American invasion. So this is, pretty much this killed his career. That he went to director's jail, as they say. He made 2 minor films after that, and then he was done. Of course, he was still doing the script doctoring, and the producer of Not Clear and Present Danger, The Hunt for Red October, is interviewed, and he has an only in Hollywood story. This producer is named Mace Neufeld. So he wants Sean Connery to play the lead in The Hunt for Red October. And Sean Connery reads the script, and he doesn't want to do it. Why not? There's not enough heroic speeches for me. I need heroic speeches. So John Milius was in the next office, and so Neufeld says to Sean Connery, "Would you like to talk to John Milius?" And Connery says, "Sure, I love John," because of course he'd been in The Wind and the Lion. So he talks to Milius, and it's agreed that Milius is going to write some heroic speeches for Sean Connery. So the movie the movie was delayed for about 2 years because Milius had a stroke. He was very lucky that he did not die on the spot. And his rehabilitation from this stroke, it took a long time and was not completed by the time that the film was completed. But it's really, touching to see the love that his son and daughter have for him and how hard he's worked. Part of his therapy was trap shooting, which is pretty funny. Famously, Milius would only agree to a script writing deal. He would name some special kind of gun that had to be procured for him. And there's lots of stories in the documentary of supposedly of him, putting a loaded, M1911 pistol on someone's desk. And, just to show that he means business. I don't know that anyone really thought that John Milius was going to shoot anyone. But I mean, that was the legend about him. Milius, as I mentioned before, was the co-creator of HBO's Rome, which ran for 2 seasons. I wish it had run for more. I mean, the history is, look who Rome has got in it. Julius Caesar and Pompey and Brutus and Mark Antony and Cleopatra. I mean, it's tremendous. And the 2 leads who play Roman centurions, they're very charismatic as well. Now, I have a complaint about Rome that a lot of it is frankly, pornographic. So, whenever I watch it, when we get to those scenes, I just, fast forward through it because I have no desire to watch that sort of stuff. But the history in it, in the lives of the centurions is absolutely tremendous stuff. I will just say, to wrap this up, that I have loved John Milius for the longest time. But after watching this documentary, I love him even more. Let's have a final look at the chat. Visionary Companion says, Goodfellas was nauseating, but if I'm feeling sophisticated, I will admit that does not mean it is a bad movie. I love Goodfellas, actually. Oscar Toe says, every time I watch Red Dawn, I feel saddened that Jennifer Grey altered her nose. I love that nose. That became a meme? Because she appeared in a short-running sitcom, which was set in L.A., about L.A. life. I can't remember the name, where Jennifer Grey plays Jennifer Grey. And the joke is that since she had this plastic surgery done, no one recognizes Jennifer Grey. I mean, there's a lesson there. Jennifer Grey says, oh, no, I have this big Jewish nose. Well, people seem to like the way you look. People seem to find you attractive. So why don't you leave it alone? What else we got here? Rothbard hated Goodfellas, though nobody's perfect. Goodfellas might be the greatest mob movie ever made, says Anne Run. I'll say this about Goodfellas, that I don't like the mafia. I mean, I just like the mafia more than most people. After The Sopranos became a hit, Budweiser was running some ad, which was like riffing on The Sopranos. Oh, we all want to be mobsters, do we? No, they're disgusting. Strong-arming shopkeepers? Ooh, tough guys. But, I love Goodfellas despite that. Anwin says Red Dawn is certainly the greatest movie ever made with both Charlie Sheen and C. Thomas Howell. Well, as one critic on the on YouTube pointed out, that it's a Brat Pack war movie, which, I mean, that pretty much sells itself, right? Although Martin Sheen, I know that Martin Sheen was very disturbed by his son Charlie appearing in that movie. Oh, this is a pretty right-wing movie, isn't it? I think when your son is Charlie Sheen, appearing in right-wing films is the least of your worries. Palcasso88 says, Murray Rothbard loved Red Dawn. I miss based old-timey libertarians like him. Yeah. Apocalypse Now has the stench of method acting, especially with the crazy Sheen, who has overdone it as a vocation, says Visionary Companion. I quite like Martin Sheen, but again, the movie is, it's unbalanced from the beginning. And I blame Coppola for that. The joke is, and you heard the joke on Community as well, that the documentary about Apocalypse Now is better than the film itself. And I've seen the documentary, and I have to say, I agree. I agree, because that was one crazy shoot. Okay. Let's see. I think that's it. Oh, when Connery, a Visionary Companion, when Connery appeared in the movie The Rock as a long hair, people in the theater where I saw it burst out laughing, and sure enough, he still sounded the same as ever. Well, let's see. It still holds up pretty well for me, but the Black Genius Sailor, who also loves classical music, remains cringe. Yeah, okay. I take your point about that. It's like, I don't know, one of the movies that was discussed by Ryan George in Pitch Meeting. It's some ridiculous movie. I can't even remember. There's so many of these ridiculous movies. And, oh, we see this hacker who's planning to take control of a satellite. And what? She takes her hat off or whatever. Oh, no. Look, it's a pretty black woman. Didn't see that one coming. Okay. I love The Hunt for Red October when it came out, but I don't think it's aged well, says Palpcasso88. I've seen it. I've seen it many times over the years, and I always enjoy it. You know, it looks like a real submarine in the ocean. This is what Tom Hanks movie, one of the recent bomb of his that takes place during World War II, and it's about convoys in the Atlantic, and it's all CGI, and everything in it looks fake. Everything in it looks fake. It's just it seems with so many people was CGI. Oh, we don't have to try anymore because the computer guys are going to look after that. Okay, I'm going to be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. And it is the book club. And I'm going to be discussing a book published this year called Welcome to Hell by Bad Billy Pratt. The week after that, September the 10th, I will discuss the true history of the conquest of New Spain by Bernal Diaz. On September 17th, Six Societies by Robert B. Edgerton, who's an anthropologist, and it is a blast against cultural relativism. On September 24th, Holy War by Nigel Cliff, and another book about Holy War on October the 1st, The West and the Rest by Roger Scruton. On Theater Thursday next week, a movie by the great Jacques Tati from 1967, his most ambitious movie called Playtime. On September 16th, speaking of CGI, Paul Verhoeven was great with CGI. If he can do it, why can't others? Starship Troopers on September the 16th. And on September the 23rd, I'm going to discuss the first silent film I've ever talked about on Theater Thursday. I know this is a neglect of mine. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari by Robert Vina from 1920. And on September the 30th, a Danish classic, Ordet by Carl Theodor Dreyer. And next week on Music Monday, I'm going to be discussing one of my very favorites, the American great Stan Ridgway. On September 13th, I'm going to be discussing The Child Ballads. That's a collection of poetry put together by an American scholar and how they have been interpreted musically. On September 20th, the subject, what was trip hop? And on September 27th, I'm going to discuss the cult of the performer. If you like the show or any part of it, I would appreciate it if you would click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you've not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, which would be gratefully and needfully, if that's the correct word, appreciated by me now at this present time in my present situation, my PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you're in Canada, donations may be made via Interact to kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.